Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Debunk the Funk. I am Dr. Wilson, and with me today we have Sarah, an individual who has been researching anti-vaxxers for a very long time. Sarah, I'm glad to have you.
Thank you very much for having me. I cannot legitimately express how much of an honor it was when you asked me to come on, because I just have massive respect for you. So I'm really excited. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, well, I have respect for you because I told you this a little bit earlier, but I've heard you talk in a few Twitter spaces, and each time you teach me something because you know a lot about these anti-vaxxers and their history, and it's a fascinating history. But before we get started talking about that, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started fighting vaccine disinformation?
Absolutely. So kind of started back in 2016, and I won't lie, it was partially frustration at the big orange man getting elected. And I felt like it wasn't vaccines at first. I was just frustrated. I felt like very upset that he had won, and I was like, there's things I could be doing. What could I do? I need to find ways to give back and put good things in the world, because this was such a bad thing, in my opinion. At least everyone's entitled to their own opinion, of course. And so I started paying attention to politics in general, and as part of that, I kind of got a little bit more opinionated, a little bit more open to just stating, no, I believe this is the truth, and I'm just gonna stand firm on that. And I posted on Facebook, vaccines don't cause autism. And I didn't know anything about like the history of anti-vaxxers or the arguments for or against. I really didn't know anything. And I hadn't done the research. I hadn't done the research either way. I was just asserting that this was the case, and by God, I was going to stick by it. And I had a family member who was like, well, you need to read the science and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, well, show me a link. And she sent me a link, and it was a PDF of 50 or so studies. I think this was 2017 when this happened. And the PDF was basically just like the title of the study, with the authors and like a little blurb or like maybe part of the abstract or something like that. But it wasn't like the full context. It didn't have the full study. It was just like little tiny blurbs. So me being kind of the smartass that I am, I decided to go through each single study on the list and like do the research on it. Who were the people that wrote it? What did the study actually say? What were the methods, conclusions, discussion, like looking through all parts of the paper itself. And I'll credit a little bit of my experience and like ability to understand some of that to my middle school science teacher who made us all science fair, and we had to read scientific studies as part of that. And that's how I knew that there was more than just the abstract. You could go and find the rest of the study. And I've said this before on the Twitter spaces and other places, but the second person on that list of studies that I was researching was a man named Mark Geyer. When I Googled him, I found out that he had lost his medical license for giving extremely high doses of Lupron to autistic children in a way that was not clinically indicated. And Lupron, for those who aren't familiar, it inhibits testosterone. It does have legitimate uses. They use it in children for precocious puberty, and they also, I think, use it for people who have prostate cancer and things like that. So it does have legitimate clinical uses, but he was misdiagnosing these kids with precocious puberty in some cases in order to convince the insurance companies to pay for it. And he was charging the parents like $6,000 a month or something crazy. And like that was the second person on this list of studies was someone who was just so obviously wrong and not to be trusted. And then I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole from there and have never looked back. It's like I went down the rest of the studies, the list of studies, and I just found more of people who were like this. Clearly didn't care that they were essentially being hypocrites, because they're like, oh, well, vaccines aren't well enough tested and they haven't, gone through double-blind and placebo-controlled trials. And meanwhile, this man literally created a false IRB that he himself was on the board of, including his son and his wife and the mother of one of the patients. And if you know anything about IRBs, that's highly unethical. They approved the study protocol for the Lupron experiments on those children. It just blows my mind. There's more. It's not just that they think vaccines cause autism. They created a microeconomy around the idea that they could also cure autism. A lot of autistic children have been caught in the crossfire of that. A lot of the parents in the anti-vaccine movement, I view them as victims twice over. They're victims of a medical system that doesn't give them the support in the first place, and then they're victims of anti-vaxxers who appear to try to fill that gap. And they are genuinely, a lot of them are genuinely trying to do what's best for their child. They just don't realize that they're just completely wrong. And it's just a hard place to be. And then again, I just fell down the rabbit hole. Here I am.
That's great. I mean, glad that you fell down the rabbit hole in a way, because now here you are producing good content on the internet, trying to educate people about these things. And so before we move any further, what content do you produce on the internet, just so people know?
So I'm probably most active on Twitter, although not as much as I used to be. So I do, and I do call it Twitter, not X, because I think X is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that, but
It's stupid. It's real stupid.
So I post a lot on Twitter. I have a Substack as well, which I also need to update soon. There's just been a lot of things going on. I sometimes, very rarely, post things to YouTube, but I've been trying to be more active on TikTok, actually.
Okay.
So pretty much any online place where there can be content to be made, you will find me under the username 42Believer.
Gotcha. Well, I'll link those in the description. But you brought up Mark Geyer, and yeah, he's a pretty common name when it comes to anti-vaxxers claiming that aluminum in vaccines is causing autism or whatever, because apparently it's being blamed for lots of things these days. And I didn't know that he was also doing that, what you described, injecting children with a sham treatment that is not just a sham, but it's harmful. I thought that was really disturbing, and it's a trend in the anti-vaccine industry. It's not just a one-off. It's what a lot of people end up doing to profit or take advantage of people who you correctly describe as victims. And so, yeah, I thought that was I think that's a really interesting story, but it doesn't end there. There are lots of others who do this kind of thing. So besides Mark Geyer, who else did you find on that list who might have done things that people don't know about?
Right. Well, I think the first one I really want to hit on is someone that most people are very familiar with, which is Andrew Wakefield.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, is tangentially part of that list of studies, because obviously everything goes back to, in my opinion, he's the father of the modern anti-vaccination movement. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole road of getting from Andrew Wakefield to that specific PDF of studies. But Andrew Wakefield, very significant because he pioneered everything. And the study that he did back in 1998, what most people don't understand is that to get the results as part of that study, they subjected the children in that study to lumbar punctures and colonoscopies. Mm-hmm. Those are very serious procedures. They sometimes can be clinically indicated for children, but on children that young, when it wasn't actually clinically indicated, as was later discovered by the British Medical Council, the whole argument about Wakefield was, he was just wrong about vaccines causing autism because he was trying to make money. It's not just that. He was using these children as a guinea pig for that purpose. Again, it was like a hidden negative consequence that most people just don't acknowledge. And that's very frustrating to me. One of the children in particular who was part of the investigations, his name was Jack Piper. And when they went to do the colonoscopy on him, they perforated his bowel in 12 different places. Mm. And the hospital ended up paying his parents like 500,000 pounds for the pain and suffering and the lifelong complications he now is suffering as a result of that. And that, yes, a lot of anti-vaxxers, when I talk about this, they're like, well, he wasn't the one doing the procedure. And I have to counter back with, his name is the first name on the paper. He's the guy. Mm-hmm. This was his theory. Yeah. He wanted this. There is no denying that he is instrumental as part of this, and that is why he lost his medical license. Mm-hmm. So Andrew Wakefield's one. There's a guy named Boyd Haley who got in trouble for chelators, advertising chelation drugs without testing them. The really nasty one that always surprises people is Carrie Rivera. Carrie Rivera thinks that you can cure autism by giving autistic children bleach enemas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So like it was just finding this like trickle of people, and it is a network. They're all very much friends with each other, and we're all part of the same community. There's some people who say, you shouldn't necessarily play guilt by association. And I think that there's, that can be true to an extent. But after doing all the research that I've done, these people are all friends with each other and all had ample opportunity to call each other out and have not done so. And Carrie Rivera was the reason why I always like to mention Carrie Rivera. She was my first successful news story. I often, a lot of times kind of behind the scenes, I try to work with journalists. I like, hey, here's this information. I think it's really important and pertinent regarding anti-vaxxers. Please look into it. And getting Carrie Rivera's books removed off of Amazon in 2019 was the first time I was able to like fight back against anti-vaxxers successfully using the media. And I will forever feel a little bit of pride every single time Carrie Rivera complains about that particular article and getting her books removed from Amazon. It's the best.
That is good. I mean, those anti-vaccine books thrive on Amazon somehow. It's bizarre. But so I think one thing that people might think listening to this when they hear Andrew Wakefield, Mark Geyer, and other names is, okay, those were people who are, decades ago, but now, sure, they did medical malpractice, but their theory was right. And now we have people in the anti-vaccine community who are carrying on their correct message. But it might surprise people to know that Andrew Wakefield is still involved in pretty much all of the leading anti-vaxxer organizations today. He regularly speaks at anti-vaccine conferences and participates in organizing them in one way or another. And he did all these things. He set up the study design where children who were not medically indicated for a colonoscopy would get a colonoscopy, expose them to unnecessary risk, and in certain cases cause unnecessary harm. And that's
it in a nutshell.
And that's not excusable. And same for his colleagues.
It's also not the message that we hear from public health on this issue. And I think that's why I hammer it so hard. Like, I feel like a broken record a lot of times. Like, sometimes I feel like I rub people the wrong way because I'm so aggressive about it. And if you go to any of like my social media and you see like a banner photo, the banner photo says anti-vaxxers abuse autistic children, because that is true. They do. And it is documented. We have evidence. They do it for profit. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I was a normal person. I just kind of average Joe looking into this stuff. And that was what made me want to fight this more so than just vaccines are safe and effective and we don't want polio back. Yes, that's true. I think that that's true. But that's not why I do this. I do this because there's a whole section of people who suffer as part of the anti-vaccine movement that just don't get seen, and that's autistic children. And again, we live in a country that doesn't have great resources for those families. So I have a lot of sympathy for that. But like, this is still a part of it. And I feel like we could potentially convince more people to be pro-vaccine if they knew some of these things. Like if Jack Piper had been just as much of a household name as Andrew Wakefield, would we be having the issue we have right now? I don't think so.
Right. You're totally right. I mean, the pro-vaccine movement needs a face as well. Anti-vaccine movements, they always have a face. They always find some person who will say that they were injured by a vaccine, whether or not they truly were, and just use them. Yeah. We saw that just recently. The last person I had on this channel, Desiree Townsend, was someone who they were openly trying to use as a face for their movement to say that she got injured by the vaccine, whether or not it was true, and it wasn't true. Yeah. And they pretty much do that with the whole autistic community. And it's just sad. It's just sad because even if these children aren't being exposed to treatments, to harm them, and still some are. But even if they're not, they're still being emotionally abused.
Right.
They're being told that, vaccines cause this terrible thing called autism. And the autistic child hears that and says, oh, well, I have a terrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not, I laugh, but it's just sad. You kind of have to laugh at it, but it's just sad because
to cope, you just kind of have to like, oh God, these people.
Yeah, because they don't need that. They just don't. I mean, I have an autistic person in my life, and they really don't deserve any more than they have already had to endure. So
Right. Well, and I think that's also, it's an untapped like ally market that I wish public health would look into as well, because there are quite a lot of autistic people who think these things, but they primarily direct all of that attention towards Autism Speaks. And I'm like, hey guys, there's more of them. You got to look at the anti-vaxxers, because it's not just Autism Speaks. There's a lot of that is the same, same people, same kind of like origin. And it is very sad. And it's not only sad when it's about autism, but it's also sad when you have these parents in the movement who've been absolutely convinced that their child died because of a vaccine. And I actually had one time, I was doing a little bit of recon on an anti-vaccine event at the Ohio State House. And I had these two, they all knew who I was, because in Ohio, I'm very well known amongst the anti-vaxxers. They do not like me. They protested outside my apartment building. Like, it's a whole thing.
Oh, wow.
They don't like me. They sent their proud boyfriends after me. It's a whole thing. So I knew that they were going to not appreciate my presence there. But these two parents, well, the set of parents, they believe that their child passed away from vaccines, and they came up to me to confront me personally. And it's so hard, because I obviously do a lot of the research on the anti-vaccine movement. So I've seen what they think about what happened to their child. And I see a lot of myself in their child. There's a lot of interests that their child had that I had, and photos where I'm like, I have a photo from high school that kind of looks like that. And so like, I'm seeing them, and I'm seeing what could be my parents. And then they're seeing me, and they're seeing me as the enemy. So we're already off on a not so great foot as soon as they come up to me. And then nothing I say is going to make them feel better, because regardless of whether or not I believe their beliefs, their child is dead. And that is a fact that I cannot change. I wish I could, because that's a tragic thing. I will never know what that's like, probably, to lose a child. So anything I say to them, I mean, my hands are tied. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to come out good either way. But I feel so sorry for them, because I've also seen videos of themselves saying, we caused this because we didn't do the research, and if only we had known, we wouldn't be here. And I know that they probably suffer from real depression and real grief and real suffering over that. And I don't think they have to.
Yeah.
They don't have to beat themselves up over that. It's in my opinion, at least, because I don't agree with their conclusions, and it's just sad that I think it's also psychologically easier to believe it was the vaccine, because you don't want to believe that the death of your child was inevitable. You always want to believe you could have done something to prevent it. And so I think it's, if I'm coming to them and I'm saying it wasn't the vaccine, then I'm basically saying it was inevitable your child died. And that, of course, they're not going to want to hear that. No one would want to hear that ever.
Right.
So it's a very tricky situation. It's a very tricky, because we have these people who are victims ultimately at the end of the day. And again, a lot of them are being sold false cures. At best, their child is receiving delays in actual good care. At worst, it's something like actual bleach, and their parents are paying through the nose for it. It's a lot. It's a lot. I think about this a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, that sounds like a really intense experience. I mean, I've talked to people before who think that they're vaccine injured. And it is hard to talk to those people, because, you can only really say, well, I can't tell you what is causing your illness. Is it the vaccine? I don't know.
Right.
But all I can say is, like, here's the data, and I hope that you are getting the attention you need from your doctor.
Right.
In those parents' case, obviously, it's a little trickier. But I'm curious, how did you handle it? How did it turn out?
They were trying to hand me the informational like flyer or thing that they had, and I wasn't accepting it at first. And the mom was like, or I don't remember if it was the mom or the dad, but they're like, you're making people uncomfortable, and I was literally just standing there with my camera and filming. Like, I wasn't trying to cause a scene. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't protesting them. I was standing there with a camera. So I had my own footage of the event, for whatever reason I might need it for. I probably will never need it for anything. You never know. So one of them was, like, yeah, you're making people uncomfortable. And I'm like, I'm sorry, and they're trying to hand me the thing. And I was like, no, 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 no. And then I basically said, out of respect for you, I will take it, basically. And so then I took it. I still have it, I think, in a folder somewhere. And I think the dad said thank you. And then I think they just kind of walked away after that. It was pretty intense in the moment.
Yeah.
I got confronted multiple times that day.
Look, I mean, that sounds, pretty intense. You're brave for that.
It's not the first time. The more interesting experience I had, like, I was actually protesting, was in 2019 in November, right before the pandemic began, basically. Is a big event they had at Washington, D.C. called the Vaccine Injury Epidemic Event. And they had all the usual suspects there. And me and my mom road tripped together. I still have very fond memories, like the best memory I have, honestly, of me and my mom is road tripping to D.C. together, staying at an Airbnb, and then me protesting with a big sign that says anti-vaxxers abuse autistic children, and literally making all of them extremely mad.
I mean, as you should, because they should face that reality.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to have a situation where, let's give someone the benefit of the doubt and say that they do have a vaccine injured child in some form. It's one thing to advocate for them, to say, hey, this is a rare side effect of vaccines. How can we make it better? How can my child get better treatment if they're not getting the treatment they need? And if they didn't get the compensation they deserve, then can they get that faster? It's reasonable to advocate for those things. It's an entirely different story to prop up people who are, pushing bleach enemas, or saying that vaccines cause SIDS, vaccines cause autism, demonstrably false things. It's just a whole other story to side with people like that. And unfortunately, those are usually the only people who will indulge their beliefs, and make them feel like they have a voice and a purpose. And so, I mean, I think we're kind of talking about a question of, like, how do we get those parents to not side with people who are just going to abuse them and use them to spread disinformation. I think we do have to take an emotional stance, or do more of an emotional approach to it. To say, this is the genuine suffering that these anti-vaxxers are causing, but we understand that your child is suffering in some form or another. Whether or not it's the vaccine, let's get that child help.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's our healthcare system. A lot of these people wouldn't be seeking out alternatives in the first place if the healthcare system gave a fuck about them. Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse.
That's fine.
If the healthcare system gave a fuck about them, then we wouldn't be here. Because also, you have to consider this as well. A lot of the push for vaccines cause autism was because they were trying to get money out of the vaccine injury compensation program. Because these parents didn't have resources. So here's an easy thing to blame, plus a system that is designed to pay out money to people who can somewhat prove that it was, caused by a vaccine. 1 + 1 = 2 in their brains, right? That this money should belong to us because our kids are vaccine injured, and that's because there was no other healthcare for them. I mean, it's resources for parents who are dealing, with autistic children, especially, on the more serious end. I know that it's not great. You know what I mean? I have coworkers who have adults with autism, and how do you deal with that? You know what I mean? When it's when it's a grown man who with the strength of a grown man and you have just a normal family trying to deal with that, there's not a good answer there. And there's not a lot of compassion because a lot of them have become anti-vaxxers over time, and that's hard for a lot of people to take seriously.
Right. The whole spreading disinformation part does make it a little harder to be sympathetic sometimes.
Yeah.
But man, wait, it's rough. It's tough. But we keep trying. And in the meantime, we keep trying to show people that these anti-vaxxers are spreading disinformation and not great people. So in that vein, we have RFK Jr. running for president. You've spent a lot of time covering him.
Mm-hmm.
What's something about him that you think that people should know, but you don't think many people do know?
That's a really, really good question. I really like that question.
If you have something cooking on that, you don't have to directly answer.
No. It's not that I have something cooking. It's just, it's a good question because he is a big name. That's the first thing about him. He got the Kennedy name. We all know that comes with a certain amount of tension, regardless of whatever else he says. There is going to be attention on him because of that. It's interesting because, again, I think he's almost like a textbook case of somebody who just, it's like Dunning-Kruger, you know what I mean? He was a lawyer. He did a lot of litigation related to water pollution, so he feels like he's a sciencey kind of guy because he's had to deal with science concepts. Then he hears about mercury in vaccines, and he's like, well, duh, mercury, in vaccines not good because mercury in water is not good. And so he just kind of blitzed through the evidence in the anti-vaccine movement without really critically looking at any of it. And so if you really take a look, I have the copy of one of his books, one of his first books, which is Thimerosal, Let the Science Speak. Mm-hmm. And I posted on Twitter a photo of all these little tabs in it. The majority of those tabs are times when he cited to Mark fucking Geyer. Okay? I sound like a broken record because I always talk about these names, but it's important because this is the quality of science he was paying attention to from the start. Mm-hmm. His entire platform and his entire reputation as this amazing, like, at least amongst the anti-vaxxers, as this amazing fierce warrior who's super smart and has all the evidence, is built off of the same shitty science that I found when I first started this shit.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the thing with the anti-vaccine movement. They always recycle the same stuff over and over again. They don't come up with anything new. And I think Kennedy even referenced Geyer on the Rogan interview at one point.
I think because they were talking about
maybe not by name, but he talked about one of the studies.
Yes, because they were referencing. I know he's mentioned him out loud by name before. But obviously he's quoted in the book many times. The reason why he brought up Mark Geyer, I think, on Rogan is because they were talking about how they never let anybody do the analysis on the VSD database. And that's partially because Mark Geyer and his son David Geyer got in trouble because when they were trying to get that data, they were doing it in such a way that violated the patient's privacy. Mm-hmm. And so they basically were told, you're no longer allowed to have access to this data because you did it in such a way that violated their privacy. And I think that's what it was in regards to. He was like, well, why didn't they let them, investigate the database? Well, the reason, RFK, is because they were unethical about it. It wasn't because they were trying to hide the proof that vaccines cause autism. It's because they were being unethical. And vaccines don't cause autism. So It doesn't matter anyway.
That was a funny claim because, I mean, there's a long list of vaccine safety data link studies just on the CDC website. They have
but those are the CDC website, okay? You understand. If it's on the CDC website, then it's corrupt and they manipulated the data. You know what I mean? It can't trust that.
Sorry, it can't use CDC.
Well, we're playing by their rules, okay?
Right. No. Yeah, they cite the same people over and over again, regardless of what atrocities they've committed. And let's call it atrocities because, I mean, it is abuse of autistic children. I still remember the first time I learned about these bleach enemas, and it's disgusting, but it's what parents really do. They see their autistic child and they see them as being so broken and so sick that they have to take bleach and give it to their children in an enema form, to the point where the child's intestinal lining literally comes out in the toilet.
I want to tell you, I've told this to a couple people. I want to tell you some of the logic behind that protocol, because it makes it that much crazier. Trust me. The reason,
parasites, right?
Huh?
Parasites, right?
Yes, parasites.
Okay.
But you have to administer them. You have to administer the enemas in cycle with the moon, because the parasites come out during certain moon cycles. And so you have to dose in a certain pattern. It's not just that it's parasites; it's that they come out at the certain times of the moon too.
Come on, stop.
Yeah,
it.
right. It's crazy, and it's the bleach enemas, and I have the book, so I know that it's an enema. But she also tells people to put it in the humidifier, and to do baths in it with the children, and obviously to have them physically ingest it as well.
Take baths in bleach.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And it's not bleach according to them, because it's different. They don't. It's not actually bleach, because it's it's so ridiculous.
So
and again, I've had to actually report people that I've found in the course of my research. I have reported people to CPS. I have found evidence that people were doing this to their children, and I have gotten letters that said we had to close your case for lack of evidence or whatever. And it guts me every single time, because it's people just don't take it seriously. I understand that they don't understand it, but it's very heartbreaking to see that happening, and knowing that it was somewhat recently, I've discovered there's a whole industry of it in Mexico, and there's a whole group in Mexico that's advertising it down there. And I'm like, God damn it. Why do shitty people exist? Why? I just, it seems so obvious to me. And it's just I wish I could wave a magic wand and make them all stop saying dumb shit, but I can't, obviously.
So where do these campaigns to push this treatment get their funding?
A lot of it is because they sell it themselves. For the classic people who know about this stuff, the classic people involved in this are what's his name? They got the Grennans, Mark Grennan.
Okay.
He was the person behind the Genesis 2 Church of Health and Healing, which is just a cult. And the way that they made money off of this was that you purchased the chlorine dioxide from their chaplains as a religious sacrament. And so they produced a lot of the chlorine dioxide. I think when the feds came and not invaded, but you know what I mean, went in after their home with a warrant, there was a video and photos of the chemicals that they found at the location. So a lot of it is the fact that they're literally the sellers themselves. And then I think a lot of it is if you can charge for a consultation for some of this, or charge to train someone how to be one of these people. It's kind of how the ecosystem goes. Right.
And so they have doctors serving as consults for this stuff.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple names. Can you remind us just who the first name was about the bleach stuff? The woman.
Carrie Rivera.
Okay.
Yeah. She's not a doctor. She's literally one of those autism moms who blamed everything on vaccines.
Okay.
And then there's Miracle Solution was already a thing before they started using it for autism as part of the Genesis 2 cult. And she kind of got some at some point or another and decided to use it at home for autism, and emailed Jim Humble, who's the guy who originally came up with it for malaria, for people who don't know. And was trying to get dosage information from them, and then started dosing her son that way, and then used her own experiments on her son as proof that it worked, and started teaching other people how to do it. And then she became the face of the autism side of that particular nastiness.
Ugh. So who are some of the doctors who are serving as consults for this stuff? Who's advertising this stuff?
I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest, because a lot of the like a lot of the people, I'll say this, a lot of it from the autism perspective is Carrie Rivera, and she's the one who would book consults with people. And she made a lot of money off of this stuff personally. What's happened since then is that there's just generally a lot of people who think that chlorine dioxide works for a lot of things. And I don't remember any of them off the top of my head, but it's a whole group called CommuSav in Mexico. And if you look up their membership roster, there's like, I just can't remember their names off the top of my head, but there's a lot of actual doctors on that list.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe that it works for everything, including COVID, obviously.
Of course, because
so that's where they've kind of been pushing, like after pandemic hit, it kind of pivoted as like, oh, we already believed it was a miracle cure for everything else. Now we're going to pivot to COVID. That's what got the Grennans in trouble because they advertised it as a COVID. It wasn't the autism. It wasn't everything else. It wasn't that they thought it cured cancer. Once COVID hit and they were actually cracking down on anybody who was pushing out bad COVID cures and illegitimate cures and stuff like that, that's what made the feds finally take the Grennans seriously and go after them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned that they also say it cures COVID because, of course, they'll say it cures COVID because there has to be a new generation of this anti-vaccine industry. And I've noticed that there's the new generation that initially started as like just spreading COVID misinformation and now are transitioning to spreading general vaccine misinformation are starting to pick up the bleach thing. Some of them. I don't think RFK Jr. has ever like blatantly endorsed things like that. However, I did read his book on Anthony Fauci, and he talked about a doctor and endorsed that doctor's protocol, which involved intravenous injection of hydrogen peroxide, which is a bleach.
Yeah.
So, and that was for treating COVID.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, he is tangential to a lot of that stuff.
Well, I will say this: Sherry Tenpenny, Andrew Wakefield, and Del Bigtree have all appeared on CommuSav doing their own little talks or interviews. So yes, we might not have RFK Jr. quite at that level. And again, I don't necessarily always like to play guilt by association. But when the boot fits, okay? Like in general, that shouldn't be something that the anti-vaccine community should be okay with. I also especially, no, I won't say that. I'm going to save that. Never mind. Sorry,
okay. Yeah, I mean, having names like it's important to mention things like Del Bigtree and Sharon Tenpenny being involved in things like that, because those are huge names in the anti-vaccine industry. Del Bigtree is a giant producer of anti-vaccine content, and he's starting to get a bigger voice thanks to this boost of this like nitrous oxide boost that the anti-vaccine industry has had since COVID. And yeah, he has endorsed some very weird treatments. So he's endorsed the bleach therapies. Is that right?
He appeared in an interview with them basically, and he tiptoed almost right up to the line. Because I'm such a hawk. I watch so many things, and I'm always like, what is the context? I want to see the full context. I never want to misquote someone. I don't want to allege something that didn't actually happen, right? Mm-hmm. He tiptoed right up to that line, basically, where he was like, if there's evidence for it, you know what I mean? Like, basically saying that he agrees with them for the most part, but, assuming the evidence is there, of course.
Plausible.
You know what I mean?
Plausible.
Kind of giving himself a little bit of an out there, in my opinion. I think he knew what he was doing. I think he's smarter than I think he knew what he was doing, but I don't know for certain. So I'll say he tiptoes right up to that line of endorsing bleach.
Yeah, plausible deniability. I mean, we've seen him do that before, where at conferences, or he's giving a talk somewhere, and he's talking about VAERS and all of these deaths that happened that were reported to the VAERS system, to say that vaccines kill this many children. And then when a reporter challenges him and says, Del, you know that a lot of those VAERS deaths are not related to the vaccine, right? I mean, we had this many drowning incidents reported to VAERS. And then he talks to the reporter as if he's like, oh, well, I never said that the vaccines are killing, all those are vaccines killing people. And it's just like, really? No, that you did say that. You did say that.
I think that kind of goes back to Andrew Wakefield's original lie, where he was like, I never said that the MMR vaccine caused autism. He still says that. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yep.
When it's very clear that he believes that. You know what I mean? It's very clear that he has always believed that from the moment he first said it in the press conference. And just because the study says they didn't, whatever, again, tiptoeing right up to that line. I think it's kind of part of that. It's that playing that smart game, you know what I mean? Where if you're someone who's just not going to question it, you might fall for that kind of line.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I mean, he's smarter than you might think. And I mean, they make lots of money doing this, but in Andrew Wakefield's case, it's so interesting how he can spend so much of his career perpetuating the myth that vaccines cause autism, and today say, oh, I never said that. And but if you ask him, right, okay, so can you say that vaccines don't cause autism? He'd say, well,
right. So. Or he'd probably say something like, well, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, you know what I mean? I'm just, advocating for safe vaccines. And then I have him on video saying vaccines are a bust. Okay, well, if you think vaccines are a bust, that kind of makes you against them, and against is anti, and that would be anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
It's just, It's a lot of word games. And I think that, especially for public health, again, like I mentioned earlier, public health doesn't always know how to respond. And they don't always pick the best argument and the best talking points, in my opinion. And they don't know how to respond to those little, like, oh, we're tiptoeing up right to it. You know what I mean? Like, I was so grateful. I think there was, what was it? It was someone who asked RFK Jr. and actually pressed him, like, well, which vaccines do you find safe, or something like that, and he essentially, like, couldn't answer the question, or didn't want to answer the question.
Exactly.
I think that you need to know exactly where to needle them. Public health people don't always know how to do that, and I selfishly sometimes think I do.
No, I think that's a great point to make, because, I talked a little bit about this before, but scientists don't get trained to talk to the public.
Right.
Even in public health degrees, actually communicating science effectively to the public, it's tough, and it's not really taught well.
Yeah.
I've said it before, but we as scientists have trouble sometimes explaining our work to our peers.
Yeah.
Like a virologist explaining their work to a neuroscientist. They might totally speak past each other and not understand it. So if you can't explain your work or the meaning of your findings to a peer and have them get the take-home message, how are you ever going to explain it to the general public? And then how are you going to respond effectively to a lawyer who is trained to argue in circles around people, trying to bring up these obscure bits of misinformation that have been endlessly debunked, but scientists are like, what are you talking about? Like,
right.
Why would you even think that?
Right.
It's really hard.
And it is really hard. And again, there's also, there's a lot of legitimate distrust of, the pharmaceutical industry. And so that makes it very hard, because who are you going to get to defend pharma? You know what I mean? Even if it is a legitimate reason to defend them. And then the people you do get are the scientists, and they don't do it very well all the time. Some of them are better than others. I'm not going to say that all scientists are bad at communicating public health. Some of them are better, but you're playing that fine line. It's so hard. They will clip anything out of context, you know what I mean? And You got to have that exact right, perfect argument and know all of their talking points like the back of your hand, which is why I was so very confident to debate Steve Kirsch, and then he backed out like a bitch. So can't do anything about that, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what he does. He ducked out a debate with you. He ducked out of a debate with me.
Yeah.
And he ducked out of a debate with a group of people that some people I know were trying to put together.
Yeah.
Gave him a very formal offer, and he said, "No, I don't actually want to debate. Bye."
Yeah. It was literally my appearance. He told me it was my appearance on Dr. Drew that convinced him to not debate me, which just proves that I was right, in my opinion. You know what I mean? Because he literally says, well, if you're not willing to debate, then that's a concession that, we're right. Well, literally, if what I said was wrong, he should have felt totally comfortable debunking it publicly and shaming me publicly. But he couldn't, because it was a talking point he'd never heard of, because I'm not from public health. I'm me. And I have a different view on these things because I approached it as an average person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think just going back to that original point, I think it's great to have people like you come in and add these arguments to the discourse, because scientists do have just a different way of approaching things. Scientists will be very particular about what they say, to say things that reflect the data, but not things that totally make sense to people. So if a scientist says something that reflects the data and I hear it and I can totally get what it means, but someone else hears it and will say, oh, there's uncertainty there. Like, for example, in scientific papers, the phrase may cause or may be associated with, or our results suggest that, like, those words,
or it's like an investigation or something.
Yeah, those words and the context in which they're said is really important, and I can make perfect sense of them, but someone who is just seeing them without that background, without that context, it can mean something totally different. But unfortunately, scientists don't write papers for lay people. Scientists write papers for their peers, because that's who they're trying to convince.
Right.
So it's a totally uphill battle for scientists to step out of the lab and into these public conversations.
And dangerous. As I said, even just as a nobody, the anti-vaxxers protested outside my house and sent their Proud Boy friends after me as a nobody, And if you're a doctor and you have your reputation on the line, and they're going to be emailing your bosses, and they're going to be emailing the hospital, and they're going to be, whoever, it also comes with all of that baggage as well, and what is a better use of that scientist's time? Staying in the lab and doing the research that nobody else is going to do, or going out and putting their face and their life on the line to defend something which shouldn't need defended in the way that it does, but because there's not a lot of people out there doing it, they're doing it. It sucks. It's like, I wish they didn't have to go do that, because again, they're going to face all that criticism, all that harassment, and then a lot of times they don't even have the tools to do it right.
Right. So what would you say that scientists need to do better when they argue with an anti-vaxxer? You mentioned knowing where to needle them, where to like knowing their arguments inside and out. But maybe let's expand on that. What are some of the common mistakes that you've seen?
I think common mistakes. It's really just about, it's being too technical, right? That's a given. A lot of the times they're just a little too technical. Let me see if I can use an example. I'm going to use the argument about William Thompson and the CDC, right? If you're using that argument about William Thompson and the CDC, they're from the anti-vax perspective, he's saying that, that they hid the data and they scrubbed it, and Andrew Wakefield was right. You know what I mean? And this is just further confirmation that Andrew Wakefield was right. A scientist is going to approach that by going to the data and saying, this is how his analysis was wrong, and and this is this is why the data that proves vaccines is right, and here's all the studies for that. I look at those two, the basically there's two claims there. It's that Brian Hooker was right, and then the second claim is that it validates Andrew Wakefield. You have to know everything about Brian Hooker and everything about Wakefield, in my opinion, to adequately counter that argument. The best way I can do that for you now, as an example, is that Brian Hooker's allegation is that the MMR vaccine, that the CDC covered up that the MMR vaccine causes autism specifically in Black boys. That's what the allegation was. Mm-hmm. There were no Black children in Andrew Wakefield's study. So how in the world could Brian Hooker and this William Thompson, how in the world could that validate what Andrew Wakefield was claiming? Simple, logical things like that. You know what I mean? I didn't have to point to any fancy numbers. I didn't have to talk about statistical analysis or methodology or use fancy words. It's very simple. This claim is about autism causing children, vaccines causing autism, specifically in Black boys. This one had no Black boys. So obviously they can't prove each other. Boom. It's really just about not seeing it from the data perspective and not seeing it just from like a debate perspective. That's what the major flaw is. I think that they've been so again, I'm willing to debate, but I think a lot of people have been unwilling to debate this stuff because they don't know all the stuff. But you kind of have to be willing to debate. You do. Because there's going to be a lot of people who won't be convinced unless they hear it reasonably from the other side. Mm-hmm. If you don't present any counter information, they're just going to believe whatever the information they have available. And if it's bullshit, then they're going to believe bullshit, right. And it's simplistic counters with having that base of knowledge. There's really no other way to do it other than to literally watch every single anti-vaccine documentary, read all their books, and be studying them for their social media for a long time. Yeah. Because then you get a sense of what their arguments truly are and how they all interconnect and how to poke the holes through. It's kind of like, again, the research I did because I was presuming that I could be wrong. Mm-hmm. When I started my research, I hadn't done any research, so I was going to do the research with the presumption that either side could be right. And then I looked through and was like, okay, well, but this is why this is wrong, and this is why this is wrong. And then I'm just seeing how that all kind of melds together. But I think there's a lot of hesitation to even engage with the arguments on a surface level and try to debunk them because it's like, I shouldn't have to. No, you do. Because this stuff isn't going away. It clearly hasn't gone away. So your method of not debating has not helped.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. And just to point out, I never thought about the whole William Thompson, Brian Hooker, Wakefield thing that way, because people will totally make that claim. I've heard it before. Make that claim and say, oh, this confirms that vaccines cause autism and it validates Wakefield's work and blah, blah, blah. And disregarding the fact that it's never been replicated anywhere, those supposed results. But just that simple fact that, Wakefield didn't have any Black boys in his study.
I actually messaged Brian Deere to confirm that, and he did. He confirmed to me that they were all white. So, I don't know what you want me to say because the majority of anti-vaxxers are white. So if Brian Hooker and the William Thompson thing is the linchpin evidence we've been waiting for, it proves that all of your children's autism wasn't caused by a vaccine. You know what I mean? Like, it's, again, just simple little, I think that, again, because scientists don't see things from that lay perspective. They just don't see those shortcut arguments, I guess. I think it's like almost like a shortcut. It's like, boom, done. I've explained why it's bullshit. We don't have to spend a million years talking about all the data points, No,
you're right. And it is kind of a skill to see the things from that perspective and also to learn all this anti-vax rhetoric, learn all their playbooks. It takes work. And scientists, you know, uh, just
They're busy being scientists,
it,
as they should be, as they should
as
be.
they should be.
You know what I mean?
But maybe they don't have to be as busy. Like the path to being a academic scientist is abysmal. The path is just not attractive as like a life path. I mean, just for, in case you don't know, and in case people listening don't know, I mean, you have to spend 4 years going to college, and then you go to graduate school, where cool thing is you don't have to pay for graduate school if you're doing life sciences. They pay you, but you make like less than 30K a year, and you make that fixed amount no matter how much you work for those 5 to 6 years it takes you to get your PhD. Then after that, you go on to do your postdoc. And at your postdoc, you might earn a little less than double what you earned as a PhD student. So after about 10 years of school, you're making around like 50 to 60K, probably. That's not great. Especially if you're going to have kids.
Yeah.
Especially if you're going to have kids during that time. It's not great. And you might have to do 2 to 3 postdocs to be competitive for a faculty position. Then you got to apply to faculty positions. You got to fly all over the country interviewing to lots of places. I've heard horror stories of people fly all around the country, go to like 5 interviews and hear nothing back. And it's brutal. And then once you actually get that that first job as a faculty member, you got to get tenure. And the path to that is tough too. So it's not great. It's not an attractive path. And any side projects or endeavors that deviate a scientist from that path could make their colleagues see them as, oh, you're not spending as much time as me on my research, so you're less than. It's really unfortunate. So I don't know, maybe if science were better funded, it wouldn't have to be so competitive. That would be nice.
I can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
Can't disagree with that.
There are lots of fronts to fight this on, but I think that this has been a good conversation with you, Sarah. Do you have anything else you want to say?
If you're not someone who wants to fight for vaccines the way that I do, or the way that you do, or the way that anyone else does, find something to fight for. For me, just because I think there's a lot of good that can be put into the world. People just don't know where to start, and they don't know if they should start. They don't know if they're qualified or not. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I jumped into the conversation one day and was smacked upside the head with how much information there was, and just kind of kept digging because I was genuinely interested in it for my own sake. It was something I was kind of doing just for me at first, just because I wanted to know more and learn more and get a better perspective on things. Whatever, if it's not vaccines, it might not be vaccines or public health or anything, whatever it is for anybody that might be listening, find that thing and just put your all into it. I have a regular job. Like, I don't know if people know, like I have a real regular job that I have to use. It's not related to public health, to pay my rent at my crappy apartment and continue living my, modest life or whatever. I'm not making millions off of this. Big Pharma's not like showering me in thousands of dollars or anything.
You're not a Big Pharma shill making millions of dollars?
I'm not making millions of dollars. Crazy, right? I'm not making millions of dollars. So, it's a privilege to be able to be in a space with academics and professionals and scientists and lawyers and things like that who have experience and advocacy in this area, and knowing that some people do look to me and are like, yeah, she knows her stuff about this stuff, and if we need expertise on that, we can reach out or whatever. And like being able to have those professional relationships, I did that all because I fought for it and I cared about it enough. And anybody can do that with anything. You just have to give a shit in the first place. So find something that makes you give a shit about the world and making it better.
I think that's spot on. And if someone does that and does it honestly, starts from a position of maybe I could be wrong, let's find out, then you'll probably get to a good place. But I want to say thank you so much for joining me, Sarah. And one more time, if people want to know where they can find you and see more of your work, where should they go?
Absolutely. Again, thank you very much for having me. If you want to see more of my work, I am 42 Believer on Substack, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, any social media that you find. I'm on Blue Sky as well. I'm, hoping to prop that up as the Twitter competitor, right? Yeah, follow me on all social media, and it's a crazy journey. I never know what's going to happen next, but I'm grateful for every day that I get.
All right, Sarah. Thanks so much for joining me, and we'll see you later.
See you later.